absolutely, and it's very interesting and encouraging to hear his comments. I think that it is a case that the Isle of Man could step up and do its bit, play its part in the resettlement of vulnerable refugees. And previously, when I brought a motion, all I was looking for was to establish the facts of whether the Isle of Man could accommodate a very small number, perhaps up to 25 Syrian refugees, and that would be our proportion compared with the UK's bid to settle 20,000 Syrian refugees.
We're currently looking at various reports on poverty. We know that we've got a social housing issue as well, and Laurie Hooper's bringing that up, of course, in the very same Tynwald sitting. So where are these Syrian refugees going to go?
Well, I think it's very important to say it isn't a case of one thing mutually exclusive to the other. Of course, we need to look to our own social issues and issues over social housing and everything else. But this doesn't need to detract from that, and it shouldn't impact on that. When I looked recently, a published UNHCR report on how the Syrian refugee resettlement programme had been achieved and how it was going. I think they said about 17,000 had now been dispersed across the UK, higher proportion in Scotland and in Ireland. They primarily do not use social housing. They use private properties, and quite often the families are extended families, so they need larger properties because quite often the family members, older generation, are with the younger generation. So I think that what I'm looking for, if this debate does go ahead and a committee is approved, it would be to look at the feasibility of resettling a small number of refugees, Syrian refugees here, under the vulnerable resettlement programme, and it would also consider whether unaccompanied children would be able to be accommodated on the Isle of Man, and we would need to facilitate that. And in fact, in my small amount of research that I've been able to do, I think, the translation services we might struggle to provide to the level that would be needed, especially issues over isolation are very important to address, and without the language and the language barrier, then that is very hard to overcome.
People will say, how many times are you going to bring this issue back to Tynwald Court until you get your way?
Well, not at all. I mean, I had finished with it last year, November. It was a very close vote, but Tynwald did not support setting up a committee to look into the feasibility of this. The simple reason for bringing it forward now is because young people, 16 and 17-year-olds, the next generation of voters, they are not satisfied that the Isle of Man is doing everything it should be doing to assist Syrian refugees.
And it's a result of a student petition, isn't it?
It's entirely the result of the student petition that I'm putting it forward to Tynwald again to see if they will reconsider and establish a select committee to look into the feasibility of the Isle of Man accommodating a very small number of Syrian refugees, whether that is possible, how that could be achieved, or whether it's not feasible.
Chief Minister Howard Quayle's been pretty adamant, hasn't he, that humanitarian aid, in his view, goes further.
That's one point, but I think if you look at the recent reports coming out of Lesbos on the Greek islands, who have got thousands and thousands of refugees living in appalling conditions, many of the refugees that are vetted and come along on the resettlement of vulnerable refugee programme, they have been living 2, maybe 3 years in terrible conditions. It has an enormous impact on mental health, family, other health conditions.
And it could get worse, couldn't it, if Turkey decides
to, well, there's also Greek islands are now taking, they're calling it a concentration camp, but they're putting huge numbers that have been on the islands in very unsatisfactory conditions. They're now moving them to a camp or a purpose-built camp on the mainland. And there's some serious concerns about, how long that will be for, what sort of conditions people will be living in. And if we look at the Isle of Man taking proportionate to the UK's 20,000, we would be talking of up to 25 people, so a small number of families potentially. I'm not sure whether that would accommodate unaccompanied minors as well. But if it's something the Isle of Man was able to facilitate, if there is the will outside there, and we know there's a lot of activity with Bank Support Refugees and the large number of, 17 box loads of winter coats that has been delivered out to the Greek islands recently, there is a lot of support. There was over 1,000 people signed a petition to the Chief Minister in 2017. So there has been this sort of constant groundswell of support to say the Isle of Man should step up and play its part in accommodating a small number of refugees. But I agree, only if that is the best thing for those refugees, for their future. And the single overwhelming fact that comes out of all the reports is they're just looking for a place of safety, and they are very grateful when they get to be resettled for the safety they are able to bring to their children's lives.